Meet Francisco Oropesa, the Mexican national, aka illegal immigrant, who shot 5 of his neighbors, including an 8-year-old child, in Texas over the weekend, reportedly over them asking him to stop firing his rifle in his yard after midnight. But I'm sure you'll just be shocked to know that not only is Francisco Oropesa an illegal alien with no legal right to be in Texas or the USA as a whole, but he's, wait for it, a criminal illegal alien who has been previously deported with multiple illegal reentries and God knows what else on his record. But the left wants you to believe this is just another incident wherein magical guns go berserk all on their own, so we must better regulate them. Well, I'm just spitballing here, but perhaps instead of infringing on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans, we just, keep illegal immigrants and especially felon illegal immigrants from doing whatever the hell they please and tap dancing all over our national sovereignty and basic laws. But maybe I'm just being silly, folks. Maybe Francisco Oropesa was just here illegally in search of the American dream, but his damn neighbors just weren't letting him live his best life in this country he has no right to be in. I bet that's it. And clearly, our wide open border does nothing but enrich our country. And as we know, Second Amendment rights for Americans, bad. Unlimited rights for illegals, good. Oh, and the border is definitely secure. The Democrats say so.
It is my testimony that the border is secure.
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration.
We have taken unprecedented action over the past year and a half to secure our border.
And we have a process in place to manage migrants at the border. We're working to make sure it's safe and orderly and humane.
The border is closed.
We agree that the border is secure.
We're executing a comprehensive strategy to secure our borders.
One of our highest priorities is to ensure that we have a secure border, and that is what we are doing.
The border is secure.
We now live in the upside down, folks. We live in a country where law-abiding citizens are told we should give up our rights and freedoms, but thugs, felons, and illegals should be allowed to run roughshod and do whatever the hell they please because Democrats need votes and some rhinos need cheap labor for their donors. And I don't care what the libs say about illegals committing fewer crimes than citizens. That's not a flex or an excuse or an accolade to celebrate. Our country is lawless already, we know. The last thing we need is to import more crime and lawlessness. And while most crimes are preventable, I for damn sure know that every act of violence and every crime committed by an illegal immigrant or their prodigy, dreamer offspring was fully preventable. And guess what, friends? Next week on May 11th, it's about to get a whole hell of a lot worse. But the Democrats won't tell you that because they've come up with a workaround. They're going to start processing these people in Guatemala and Colombia so as to reduce the appearance of a large-scale border invasion. They'll process them there out of your sight and then usher them in here. It's still an invasion. It just won't look as obvious, and they'll call it refugee resettlement. I know a lot of you have turned a blind eye to the border, and what's coming is about to smack you square in the face. And as for Francisco Oropesa, I'm sure this story will be out of the headlines momentarily, given that every crime committed by an illegal or a trans seems to disappear like magic.
A Delaware County councilman is coming out as transgender and a woman of color. Delaware County Councilman Ryan Webb announced that he now identifies as an Indian American woman. Since that announcement, he's received some support, but a lot of backlash, many calling him childish, despicable, even calling for things like execution. In a statement Webb gave to ITMate, he says, quote, "It is unfortunate that I cannot simply be given the same space and respect to explore my identity that so many of those targeting me demand for themselves. It's possible I may change my mind down the road. The process of identity exploration is complex, and oftentimes at the end of our personal journey, we end right back where we started." Webb goes on to tell ITMate this is just his true, authentic self.
Well, in a hypocritical yet completely expected plot twist, LGBTQ activists are demanding Ryan Webb resign, claiming he is mocking trans people. Okay, now do Leah Thomas, who pretends to be a woman to win trophies, or the new favorite, Dylan Mulvaney, who pretends to be a woman to make money and endorse women's products. You know, if the Rainbow Mafia wants to make a laughingstock out of women and do it under the guise of tolerance and exploration, then why the hell should the rest of us be precluded from doing the same? Joining me now with her take on it all is host of the Blair White Project, Blair White. Blair, it's great to have you.
Hey, Tommy, you interviewed me many moons ago, so it's cool to talk again.
You know, so much has changed. I think every week it changes a little more. I think that the oppression totem pole just gets higher and higher and higher. But this is where we are today. And I want to jump right in with probably the topic that's been on most people's minds in the last, I guess it's been almost a month now, is the whole Dylan Mulvaney of it all. I really want to get your take. And of course, I know your tweets and I know your stance from that, but I want you to explain to my audience what you think of somebody like a Dylan Mulvaney. Do you think that Dylan Mulvaney is authentically somebody who believes in his mind that he is transgender, or is this all a front and a farce to make money?
So while it's impossible to get into the hearts or minds of other people, don't know what's going on in that person's head, I personally don't believe it's actually a trans person for the simple fact that if you look at Dylan's history, Dylan is a trained actor, a theater kid. And what I believe is that Dylan has constructed a character that is good for the TikTok algorithm. If you look back at Dylan's earliest videos, Dylan tried on a bunch of different identities. This is the one that stuck. This is the one that got him to the White House. And what's really unfortunate is that, Dylan has now become the most visible trans person in the corporate press, but kind of sucks to be, an actual trans person, have someone that you don't even think is trans representing you. To me, Dylan has constructed a character using the most offensive stereotypes about women and about trans people, and has used those to really leverage himself and get attention. So, I think of all the people that I've met, through my life, I've met trans people that have served in the army. I've met trans people that are lawyers and doctors and people that are actual participating members of society and don't go through life like Dylan. And so I think of all the people that would be more worthy of being on a Bud Light can. Not that I drink Bud Light, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I talked to Caitlyn Jenner about this a lot, and I think that people like Dylan Mulvaney and others really are making a mockery of the actual LGBTQ movement in and of itself. Yeah. And the fact that so many can't see that and are not offended by it actually stuns me, because this has become a profession for Dylan Mulvaney and others, a profession just like it is for Leah Thomas, where it's, do they authentically feel this way? Do they generally have gender dysphoria? No, they found that this is a way that they can dress up and be an actor, but do it, to me, in the most demeaning way possible, not only to women, but as you mentioned, to actual transgender people. So this is why it's so frustrating. I had a friend of mine who's on the Democrat side, a good friend of the Kardashian family, text me over the weekend and say, I don't get why conservatives are okay with Caitlyn Jenner and not okay with Dylan Mulvaney. And I explained that exact thing to her, and I think that maybe there's somewhat of an understanding there. But when we go back to the agenda of this new LGBTQ movement, I want to know why you think this movement has become about transgender surgeries for minors and drag queens for children, because that seems to be the two biggest gripes that this new LGBTQ movement has on the agenda.
Well, it's really unfortunate to be a trans person that really doesn't recognize the trans community or the LGBT community at large anymore, at least on the ideological side. I get that there are individuals, and I take every individual as they come. But when I look at the goals of activists, it's completely antithetical towards my goals, and it's irreconcilable in terms of beliefs. So when I transitioned 8 years ago, the idea that this was something for kids was absolutely not even a thing. There was no one around me that I knew that was trans or transitioning that even considered that to be, part of what should be happening or what we should be fighting for, right? And so that, to me, I've been speaking out against children transitioning, child sex changes, surgeries that, permanently alter the bodies of children in the name of trans ideology for years before it was even a national conversation. So it's actually really horrifying to see how prevalent it's become, how common it's become, and how it's now, there are people in the White House, including Joe Biden, of course, advocating for it, while we're looking at other countries in Europe that were sort of early, fighters for this issue and were transitioning children years before even we did in America. And they're reversing course. They're saying, we're seeing this have some, bad outcomes. There's an interesting study that followed a bunch of gender dysphoric biological males from, I believe it was 2002 to recent, and it showed that 88% of these children actually grew out of that gender dysphoria if they were given the opportunity to grow. And that actually goes right in line with what I believe, which is transition is something that should be reserved in extreme cases for people that have that condition, and it persists through their adult life when they're actually capable of consenting to these surgeries that do change your body forever. I don't think any sane person, whether you're trans, black, white, anything, thinks that children can consent to sterilizing themselves. And that's what happens when you take hormones and puberty blockers. You cannot have children. The idea that a 13-year-old can have their mind made up on that front when they can't drive, they can't get a tattoo, they can't get a piercing. You can't even rent a hotel room until your mid-20s in some states. There's a young detransitioner I know who is on the road speaking out against minors transitioning, and she has to have someone else book her hotels when she speaks because she's only 19 and she can't even book hotels in certain places. So it's really really scary. And on the front of drag shows for children, that's another thing. Drag has become very mainstream. And I think that because it's become, drag races on MTV and there's drag conventions and it's kind of everywhere in every major city, there's this misconception that that's somehow child-friendly entertainment simply because it's mainstream now. And it really is not. Anyone who's ever been to a drag show knows that most of the time it's overly sexualized, inappropriate for kids. And so, the idea that because I'm trans, I'm supposed to be on board with all of these things is offensive to my sensibilities.
Do you think that we're going to enter a time when people like yourself and others are able to correct this movement, to correct the radicalized nature of what this movement has become? Because I work with another organization, Gays Against Groomers, that are really trying to do the same thing. Like, hey, listen, we don't agree with this. We don't exist in a monolith, and maybe some course correction is possible. Or do you think it's only going to get worse from here?
I think things will get worse before they get better, but I think it will have to correct itself. What's happening now is not working. Even if you just want to look at the fact that, the LGBT community and activists, and I do make the distinction because oftentimes they are very different. Activists claim that what they want is societal acceptance, that they just want people to accept and to love LGBT people. Well, if you're looking at the methods they're using, it's doing the opposite. LGBT acceptance rates are declining even among young people for the first time in almost a decade. And that's to be noted. So clearly their strategy isn't working. So I think it will correct course. I think the difference between gay people and trans people is, first of all, there's a lot more gay people, so there's a lot more of them that are willing to speak out and form these great groups like Gays Against Groomers, like you mentioned. And with trans people, traditionally, and what trans people used to be before this new activist wave, the goal was to sort of just blend into society and not make a lot of ruckus. And so that is hardwired in a lot of the more rational trans people. So they don't want to be out there speaking against things and being on a podium like I am. So I do hope that people join and sort of correct course on this, because at the end of the day, children are being harmed. And like I said, I don't care what identity you have, what group you are a part of. If we can't rally behind children, then all is lost.
Just keep it away from children. That's all that most conservatives ask. I have a clip I want to play for you and get your take on it. Here is a mashup of Dylan Mulvaney and Britney Griner talking about their favorite topic. Let's take a listen.
Everyone deserves the right to play. Everyone deserves the right to come here, sit in these seats and feel safe and not feel like there's a threat or they can't be who they are, or like it's just all eyes on them. So I think it's a crime, honestly, to separate someone for any reason.
Like the articles written about me using he pronouns and calling me a man over and over again. And I feel like that should be illegal. I don't know. That's just bad journalism.
So Blair, there are people that purposefully misgender people and they do it to make a point. And then there's people who just quite frankly cannot keep up with the pronouns and the they, them, and the cis. There's a lot of straight people who don't even know what cis means. They don't know that they're cis. They don't understand it. There's so many definitions. Everything has become so wild at this point. But to have Britney Griner sit there, who is a WNBA player, and say that there shouldn't be, it should be a crime to keep biological men out of women's sports, and then Dylan Mulvaney saying it should be a crime to misgender somebody. What is your take on that? And how would you talk to either of those about what they're advocating for?
Well, first of all, I would say to both of them, calm down, because calling for people to be arrested for disagreeing with you, calling for, police to be involved, like, just stop. I think the idea, again, this is another thing I get a lot of heat for, but the idea that trans women should be involved in women's sports is 100% illogical. It ignores so many biological realities. It's insane that the trust the science side has the opinion of, biological males being involved. Like, we've had this figured out years ago. Sports have always been segregated by sex, and it was for a reason. Trans women have larger bone mass, larger muscle mass, larger lungs, larger hearts. It's an entire litany of reasons why that's the case. And in terms of Dylan Mulvaney, the idea that speech is being compelled by law is another thing that a lot of conservatives have an issue with. I moved to Texas a few years ago, and I've really gotten to know red state people in a way that I wasn't able to in California, even though I was still a Republican in California. I'm surrounded by nothing but, like you said, straight, non-trans, conservative red state people. And yeah, they can't keep up. And guess what? Neither can I. The list of pronouns, the list of rules that are changing every week. This is why I say that trans activists are actually the enemy of real trans people, because their goals are antithetical. Real trans people have the goal of integration into society, of respecting women, of respecting spaces. Trans activists have domination as their goal. They want to be able to go into spaces that they should not be. They want to be able to dominate women's sports. This cult and this worship of identity is so much of a separate issue than just trans people. The idea that Leah Thomas can identify as a woman and go into women's locker rooms is disgusting. There's horror stories that have come out from the Leah Thomas case of, genitals being exposed in front of women. And the idea that that is remotely acceptable or cool, all for the sake of not hurting Leah Thomas's feelings, is the issue. So I think, actually, I know, because I've gotten to know so many people now, that are in this part of the country that maybe trans is more of a foreign concept to them. Literally, no one would have an issue with trans people if there were not, calls to mandate speech by law, and, spaces being used that are inappropriate. So at the end of the day, it's about respect. You have to give respect to get respect. That's something I learned very early on as a trans person. And it's something that works. It's something that trans activists, though, refuse to do, which I find really upsetting.
Well, I'm so happy that there are people out there like yourself, like Caitlyn Jenner, that are speaking some common sense into this and reminding people, especially people that find the whole concept of transgenderism to be so unfamiliar to them, reminding them what it truly is, what it truly means to you, and respect is at the core of that. That's the same thing that Caitlyn Jenner has told me over and over again. So you're welcome in the conservative silent majority movement. We're glad to have you, and thank you for using your platform to spread so much logic where it is greatly needed. I appreciate you, Blair.
Thank you.